Hello, my friends, and welcome to another episode of Unlimited. Today, I am sharing a little of my own journey of redefining beauty. And there are so many layers to why I wanted to engage this, and they keep kind of getting re-emphasized in various places. But, as I've been talking about and thinking about change, individual and societal, intentional and unintentional, and how they all relate, I've had more and more reminders of how important it is to engage this process, engage the societal problems that we see through also doing the inner work, because there are so many times where we don't even realize what's been internalized, but it still influences us. There's a quote going around right now, especially because of the decisions in Texas, the abortion law that just passed in Texas. It's a quote that's often attributed to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but is actually from a writing by Sarah Grimke, who is a Quaker abolitionist and suffragist, one of the first suffragists, that says, "I ask no favors for my sex. I surrender not our claim to equality. All I ask of our brethren is that they will take their feet from off our necks and permit us to stand upright." Many of the places where empowerment is restricted, our choice is restricted, are not internal things. Not everything's mindset, as I've said before. However, mindset comes into play when we've internalized the stories, when we don't even recognize that there is a foot on our neck. Without being aware of what's going on, we don't have choice. We don't have the option to remove it. I was on a call just recently with a client who was expressing anxiety and stress around some situations in her life, and she told me about them, and I said, "Well, it sounds like you are looking at a number of choices." And she said, "I am." And I listed out the choices that I was seeing were in front of her. And she said, "Oh my gosh, that's true. I didn't even realize I had a choice. I didn't even see those as choices to make." And without being able to see what's in front of us, we can internalize the foot on our neck as part of our identity and actually defend it and impose it upon other people. So I'm seeing more and more stories about beauty, and there's a big body positivity movement going on right now. You may have seen on social media, there's a pushback against the social media filters and what gets posted on social media as a way to show real bodies and kind of reclaim the space. And this is because of the info coming out about, Zoom dysmorphia, where we see ourselves on Zoom all the time and it's distorting our perception of ourselves because of the camera being what it is. Social media filters also set up unrealistic expectations and then increase negative body perception. And I think about these filters and I go, well, but whose beauty standards? Yes, we're reclaiming the space for bodies, real bodies. At the same time, whose standards are being perpetuated? And how much are we choosing the standards that we believe in? I realized recently that there was a lot of things that I was just taking for granted and trying to come to terms with and finding ways of accepting myself despite these standards, instead of going, maybe it's the standards. Maybe these standards are a foot on my neck that I need to claim a freedom from. And how am I perpetuating problematic narratives by buying into these standards? So that's essentially what this podcast is about. Nothing heavy here or anything like that. It's really easy to want to be on the other side of change. And I talked about this with Naomi Gottlieb Miller in our episode, Allowing Space to Imperfectly Love Your Body. And I've been on this journey for a long time, but only recently kind of becoming aware of places where I hadn't even questioned, I hadn't even recognized choice. And in that episode, I talk about the power of tapping into the process of building that relationship, that the change comes from building the relationship. And Naomi talks about how you can have big dreams, but it's a journey of tiny steps. And both of those really resonate for me, because all of this that I'm going to share, I'm going to try and put it together in a clear way that you can follow me on this journey to where I am now, which is still in process, and recognizing that this is an important processing. So some of the things I'm going to cover are societal and generational learning and unlearning, the expansive experience of decolonizing my library, walking through shame toward radical self-love, challenging society's beauty ideals, intimate relationships, and what is quote-unquote sexy. So, a lot to cover here, a lot to share. So without further ado, let's get started. Hey there, I'm Valerie Friedlander, Certified Life Business Alignment Coach, and this is Unlimited. This podcast bridges the individual and the societal, scientific and spiritual, positive and negative, nerdy and no, there's just a lot of nerdy. Come on board and let's unlock a life that's as badass as you are. Recently, my family discovered an old reel-to-reel of a reading of her poetry that my grandmother had done. And I want to start by sharing one of those poems because I feel like it really emphasizes some of this processing that I've been doing on a generational level, as well as within my own life. Take a listen.
The Sorting. Diaries. When she would laugh and say they'd called her Bohemian, it didn't fit my staid and sober mother. She played accompaniments for chorus and soloists in church and rotary, but all the rest was sewing, cooking, cleaning, Bible study, and what the word assassins of our day call parenting. Now I have her diaries. At 20, she was traveling with a troupe of entertainers. True, they played mostly in churches, who argued with them over percentages, but it was still not done by nice girls in 1907. Even worse, she stayed all summer long at the well-known spa in Webster Springs and played for dances. Where did she go? This girl who called up boys she knew in towns she toured, who went to the end of the streetcar line on picnics, unchaperoned, and teetered on bare feet across the rocks of chuckling country streams. When did the woman arrive whose favorite test of social approbation turned on the term refined?
Refined. So I looked up refined. I also looked up bohemian because I was curious at that time what was bohemian, what was considered bohemian. And the term bohemian in 19th century referred to the Bohemian movement in Paris, which was associated with roving Romani people who were believed to have come from Bohemia. They were outsiders to conventional society, untroubled by its disapproval. And there was a connotation of arcane enlightenment. There was also a pejorative connotation related to carelessness about personal hygiene and marital fidelity, which I'm going to come back to a little bit later. Refined is defined as elegant and cultured in appearance, manner, or taste. So, quote unquote, civilized. There's another definition that they use, sugar as an example, the idea of refining sugar. And it says, with impurities or unwanted elements having been removed by processing. So this makes me think of this idea of being unconventional and then going through this process of refining, of removing these unwanted elements and becoming more civilized. And, who defined what was civilized? I'll dig into that in a minute, but how were we refined? And I would encourage you to look at that. Like, how were you refined? I've had clients who have said, I was this one way, and then somehow I became this other way, and I don't know, when did I stop being that person? And a lot of times, our society reinforces these belief systems through individuals in our life, but also through messaging that we get everywhere. This shaming. Identify what's unwanted and shame it out of you. And beauty, standards of beauty and body are something that is very controlled and shamed around. I mean, there's this whole reason why we have a body positivity movement is to try and reclaim this relationship with our body when we've had it so shamed. And it doesn't even matter what size you are or what you look like. Most of us, women especially, female identifying people, have experienced some level of shame around our body. So who decided what was beautiful? It's usually related to a power structure and a control. So this is percolating. This poem is percolating and emphasized with clients. And I've picked up several books working on decolonizing my library, learning more, deprogramming, accessing awareness so that I can make better choices. One of the books that I picked up is Cast, The Origins of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson. I'm still working through all of the books that I reference here. They're still in process. One of the quotes that struck me early on was around the idea of dehumanizing people. And by dehumanizing people, they dehumanized themselves. And how we do this, again, going back to that idea of when we've internalized the rules, even if they are rules that have a foot against our neck, when they become part of our identity and a way of fitting in, of being accepted, we tend to perpetuate them and perpetrate them onto other people to reaffirm our worth in being. Oftentimes to reaffirm this lie of stratification, this ladder mentality. Another thing that's said in here is that it was in the process of ranking that we were all cast into assigned roles to meet the needs of the larger production. None of us are ourselves. So I've been sitting with that idea. Who am I? If I am not myself, if I have internalized, and I have, a lot of belief systems within the society that I grew up in, because how can you not? Who am I? What choices am I not seeing? What ways have I been refined and am now refining myself? Enter Sonia Renee Taylor, who is a world-renowned activist and poet. I picked up her book, The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love. One of the things she says in this book is the work we have done or will do is not about acquiring some way of being that we currently lack. The work is to crumble the barriers of injustice and shame leveled against us so that we might access what we have always been. Going back to taking the foot off of our neck that's blocking us from our true power. She references Marianne Williamson on natural intelligence. Marianne Williamson said that an acorn does not have to say, I intend to become an oak tree. It just does. It is naturally inclined to become that. We all have exactly what we need in this moment to manifest the highest form of ourselves. And we don't have to figure out a way to get it. We don't have to figure out how to get it. We already have all the material we need. And it reminded me of the conversation that I had with Liz Hansen, where she said toward the end of our episode around building confidence through boudoir, she said, when I started, I just viewed myself as a girl who wanted to take some pictures and hoped it worked out. And now she is a fully booked boudoir photographer. She's a mentor. She is an employer. She has a Facebook group with thousands of women. It's amazing. And it just started with her doing the next thing and doing the next thing. This is kind of the root of one of my favorite words, coddywampling, which I've mentioned before. That idea of walking purposefully toward an unknown destination. To do that takes awareness that there is a destination, and that by doing the next thing and being intentional and purposeful in the way that you move, the natural intelligence will naturally carry you to your highest self, to the oak tree that you are meant to be. But to do that, we have to walk through the shame that we've internalized. And part of that shame, especially for those of us who are white, who are heteronormative, cisgendered, any layer of the hierarchical privilege in our society, takes walking through the shame of being part of the problem, recognizing that it is not just a foot on our neck, but that our foot is on someone else's neck because we've internalized these stories, because we are part of this system too. And there's a lot of shame in recognizing that you have been part of a problem. It takes a lot to engage that. And, part of that has been me kind of looking at my own history, my family's history, and seeing where we've had, I would love to tell stories, and I've actively looked for how were my ancestors good people? And having to pull back and go, it's the binary that's the problem. If I keep looking for good, I block myself from seeing the gray areas, the places that need to be released, the places where there was a foot on someone's neck, and where that foot then therefore went onto mine, trying to uphold stories that were not true. There's a shame and harm, but avoiding it, we certainly will perpetuate it. And it's embedded in generations and in systems. One of the stories that I hear so often perpetuated by women, especially mothers, is this guilt around taking up space in their own lives, in asking for help, in being connected. There's danger in needing help. There's all kinds of assumptions that can be made. There's all kinds of openings that can happen, that harm can be done in and to. I think back again to my grandmother and some stories that she would tell me about how my grandfather, her husband, would encourage her pursuits, the things that she was interested in doing. And she did many things. She danced, she wrote, she was an editor, she was a music critic. She did so many things. And while he encouraged her to do these things verbally, he still always wanted her home for him, for their children. So there was this shaming process of, yes, sure, you can have these things, but what does it mean to be a good wife? What does it mean to be a good mom? It's one of the questions that I ask a lot of my clients when I notice that we have shame or self-worth stuff coming up, or these shoulds, these guilt spaces where I don't want to take space for myself, or when I do, I just feel guilty, so I don't get the full rest, the full connection that is possible in the space that I gave myself because I was so busy beating myself up. And I usually will invite them to take a look at, what are the rules? What makes you a good mom? What makes you a good wife? What makes you a good employee? Look at the places where the label of good or bad is placed, because oftentimes that hides rules that are misaligned with our highest self, feet on our necks, that we've internalized. One of the things that I talked about with Naomi that she shared was, there's this story one of these stories is fiction that generates from there that we haven't become perfect enough to have earned being cared for, to have earned the space that we want to take up, that we can't be us yet until we have achieved some impossible level of perfection, some impossible way of fitting in. And I think this ties into some of that stratification of we're told, here are the rules to achieve, but they're not actually for you. And again, layers of privilege determine who it's for. If you just do this enough, if you just do that enough, then you can have, but you can't really have. So we've set impossible, unrealistic standards, which is why it's so important to normalize being messy, flawed, imperfect human beings. I was thinking about this in the idea of a rug of perfect. Like, we built this house and there's a gaping, terrible hole in the structure of the floor. But if we just put a rug over it, and a nice rug, a rug that fits in enough, depending on how much this structural hole is affecting us. If the rug can just be nice enough, then out of sight, out of mind. But how horrible is that to choose not to see? And again, then there's the shame of choosing not to see, or not even recognizing that there was a choice. And there's shame in that too. So releasing the shame of having those internalized obstructions, of perpetuating those internalized obstructions and going, okay, what's next? What's the next step? I envision it kind of like stretching a comfort zone, though I don't know if I would call it a comfort zone, but more like being in this bubble where you kind of stretching your arms and trying to stretch this elastic story around you, trying to create space for ourselves, space for other human beings, space to be imperfect, and space to grow from that. So I continue to engage these ideas, this processing, moving my body, being in my body, engaging my body, moving my brain. And I love how Naomi talks about this, about that idea of moving, the movement needing to happen. So that's stretching, that moving my body, trying to expand the space, engaging these parts that obstruct me from true choice, from recognizing that I can choose. One of the quotes from Sonia in her book is, "None of us are immune to the social, political, and cultural indoctrinations of body shame. Without intentional exploration of how, not if, we have adopted biased body shame beliefs and a commitment to interrupting them as we continually seek to uncover them in ourselves, we will continue to obstruct the full manifestation of someone else's oak tree." Going back to the need for awareness, the need to engage, the need to pull up that rug and go, God, there's work that needs to be done on my house. Pieces that I built, that I put over it, the rug, the table, the chairs to cover it up, that I was told made it beautiful, that made me beautiful, and what those standards are of beauty that I have internalized, that I've agreed to. Enter Alok, an internationally acclaimed gender nonconforming writer, performer, and public speaker, asking me, why would I deny the world my beauty? Why would you deny the world your beauty? Embrace the magic that sings beneath your shame. I will have a link to a podcast interview that they did on the Man Enough podcast. That is very powerful. I mean, everything that I've found by Alok had been very powerful. But I was listening to this and it really hit home to a lot of what I've described. They shared a book report on the book Plucked, A History of Hair Removal by Dr. Rebecca Herzig. I have not read this book yet, but I read their book report. And it describes how 19th century European thinkers used Darwin's theory of evolution to argue that race was an evolutionary continuum. So racialized people were savages and white was the most evolved. Body hair was part of this. Body hair was seen as a marker of animality. Related to this was the idea that the more advanced civilizations had more of a visible difference between males and females. So thus, the maintenance of white women's proper physical appearance became about maintaining the quote-unquote health of the white race. There was an unprecedented effort to make body hair removal mandatory for women in the late 19th and early 20th century. Any hair on a white woman's body was seen as excessive, and body hair became associated with dirtiness because of its cultural association with racialized people. Going back to that idea of bohemian and the pejorative connotation of being bohemian, of a carelessness about personal hygiene, tied to that concept. I read this and I think also about how many things we've pathologized. How many dynamics, unhealthy stories have we made about the individual that's really a foot on our neck? A societal norm keeping us restricted, keeping us down to the degree that we have the ability to fit into this society, into the norms. I've talked about imposter syndrome as one of them. Well, in 1876, the American Dermatological Association became, quote unquote, concerned with hypertrichosis, otherwise known as extensive body hair. Yet another thing being pathologized that is based in a story that was made up to separate us, to put some higher than others. From this, magazines promoted white, hairless, feminine beauty. Jewish, Italian, Eastern European migrants especially were targeted under the idea that removing hair would allow them to integrate into Anglo-dominant whiteness. So it wasn't just the shape, as I've always looked at it, the shape of our bodies, the size of our bodies, but also the amount of hair on our bodies and what that hair looked like. I know so many women who have shaved not just their legs, not just their armpits, but their arms. And I would love for you to share with me, what have you felt the need to shave? At that time, X-ray epilation procedures were encouraged, and this actually led to hundreds, if not thousands, of women dying from these procedures. This stratification is deadly. And of course, it's more deadly the more outside of the norm you fall, outside of the hierarchy that has been normalized, I should say. So this idea has been perpetuated that hair on women is ugly, hair is dirty, hairy women equal failed women. Back again to my great-grandmother on being refined versus being bohemian. I bet she shaved. This was the time when that would have been emphasized for her. At this time, 99% of U.S. American women now voluntarily remove their body hair, and the spend on average is more than $10,000, and of course more than that if they're waxing versus shaving, and nearly 2 entire months of their lives managing unwanted hair. Unwanted because we were told that it was dirty, that it was ugly, and that to achieve the standards of beauty that were set to separate us required that it was removed. I've never liked shaving, but it was never seen to me as a choice. It was just the thing that you did once you got to a certain age, once you hit puberty, or before, depending, that you wanted to be smooth. Body hair was undesirable. I've never really thought of it as a choice. And reading this study and thinking about the ways that we've internalized these stories and stories that were built on separating us, built on dehumanizing people and making it so that some had more privilege than others, I decided to stop shaving. I decided to not necessarily forever, but because I wanted to explore choice, a choice that I'd never really thought about before, about being something that I could choose. And I recognize that for a lot of people, it is a choice, and it's a hard choice. Alok shares their journey with body hair, and thinking about this as like, what does it mean to me? How do I connect with my body? Connecting with my body in the shape that it is. For so many years, I told myself that I was heavy, I was overweight, I was fat, I was not desirable. And looking back at pictures of myself and thinking, what was I thinking? But it was something I was told at a young age. I was shamed for my size being larger than other girls. And now kind of exploring, okay, well, what does it mean to not shave? What does that look like? I don't like doing it. I like the result like immediately after, but give it a half a day and it's like, oh, well, I'm going to shave again. So what does it look like if I can choose that? I don't know yet. I haven't figured that out. I haven't decided how I feel about it. I'm still processing it. It's brought up a lot of questions for me around my own gaze and my own perception and how it's been influenced, my own belief in what is beautiful, how I looked at myself as a young person thinking that I wasn't beautiful. Another book that I have been exploring is My Grandmother's Hands, Racialized Trauma and the Pathway to Mending Our Hearts and Bodies by Resmaa Menakem. And one of the things he writes in that is the cultural operating system of white body supremacy influences or determines many of the decisions we make, the options we select, the choices open to us, and how we make those decisions and choices. This operating system affects all of us, regardless of the hue of our skin. So what choices have I made, and how am I seeing my body? And can I see my body as beautiful if I haven't shaved? Again, I don't know. I haven't come there yet, but I'm exploring it because I want to be able to choose. And I also don't want to say that it's okay for other people and say that they're beautiful regardless of what they choose and not actually mean it, because I can't mean it for myself too. It's that acting as if that I feel like is kind of like lying to myself if I haven't actually engaged the question. If I haven't engaged it and unpacked it within myself, how can I possibly engage it with other people in a true, real, honest way? And it brought up for me this idea of assumptions. What are people going to think when they look at me? What assumptions are they going to make about me? There was a post that Naomi did recently about her husband getting called a hippie for reusing a plastic container. And I thought, God, if he's going to get called a hippie, what am I going to get called? I don't really care what people call me, but I do question what kind of impact can I have if I've already been put into a box. And then I recognize the privilege in saying that the privilege in being able to alter that to a rather extreme level just by removing my body hair. So I come back to, this is a choice that I get to make, and it's a privilege to make that choice, and it's my turn to be uncomfortable with it, to sit with it, to explore it, to love myself through it, and remembering that I can't control other people's assumptions. The only assumptions that I have power over are my own, and I need to be aware of those assumptions, because if I'm not aware of those assumptions, aware of those stories, aware of the feet on my neck, the feet that I put on other people's necks, if I have not engaged those assumptions, I can't possibly show up in a way that allows me to help healing. If I cannot love myself, how can I truly love someone else? I don't know what feels good yet, but I am giving myself choice in this. I'm exploring what that looks like. Now, some people might also ask, like, okay, well, but how does your husband feel about this? Well, one, I go back to something else that Naomi said of like, what if my husband didn't love my body? It's great that he accepts me and thinks that I'm beautiful, but what if he didn't? Me loving my body is so much more important. The journey that I'm on is not for him to accept my body. It's for me to love my body in all the shapes that it takes. Now, I'm blessed that my husband just thinks it's interesting and is curious about this experience that I'm having, because he says, I've never had this experience and I don't want to make you uncomfortable asking you about it. At the same time, I'm curious. What is this like for you? And I also recognize that the hardest times in our marriage have been times where I didn't want to be in my body. I didn't want to be with my body. After giving birth, my body had changed so much and I did not love my body. I did not think my body was beautiful. I tried, but I didn't. And I just didn't want, I couldn't conceive of him thinking my body was beautiful. And I couldn't feel like my body was beautiful. And those were the hardest times in our marriage. So I appreciate his support, but also this is my journey. It's my journey to, as Sonia would say, radically love myself. Related to this idea of love and generations and unlearning and reconnecting, my grandmother has another poem that she writes from my great-grandmother's perspective. It is a letter from a mother to a daughter, and I'd like to share that with you. Take a listen.
A mother to her daughter. It's a family joke how I jumped across the room when he first kissed me on the ear. That day we became engaged. Nice girls never thought of kissing a young man then until he proposed. I wanted to marry him, even though he said we never would have children. He had sinned the sin of Onan. His Puritan father had declared such sin made a man sterile. He was grown, but never thought to question that boyhood curse branded on his soul by a father's wrath and his own guilt. And I believed it too. No one had ever told me about such things. We were engaged 2 years and never went beyond kissing until the day we wed. And then we came together always in the dark, a furtive Adam and Eve after the fall. When I found the curse was lifted, I cried for joy and felt I knew at last what a woman was for. I had more pleasure in bed the day you were born than I ever had with him. In 50 years, he has never seen me naked. How can these young girls go dancing through the streets without a stitch? Have they no shame? We have slept in separate rooms for a long time now. We are old and need our rest. But he still hugs me and kisses me on the ear. You've made a good marriage. Remember how shocked I was the day I found John making love to you? You weren't even engaged. But he did the right thing. And it's worked out well, I think. Hasn't it? Tell me, what is it like to love?
I appreciate this generational perspective, to see both the evolution and acknowledge the evolution and recognize the challenges, the stories, and how deeply embedded they are. What is it like to love, to be comfortable with myself? And remember, this is the same woman who was bohemian and who became refined. The more that I dig into and heal my own trauma, my own wounds, free myself of these generational stories, societal stories that keep me from loving my body, I believe the better I can hold space for other people's bodies to be loved, I can nurture the ecosystem of acorns becoming oak trees. As Sonia says again, a radical self-love world is a world free from the systems of oppression that make it difficult and sometimes deadly to live in our bodies. A radical self-love world is a world that works for every body. Creating such a world is an inside-out job. How we value and honor our own bodies impacts how we value and honor the bodies of others. It is through our own transformed relationship with our bodies that we become champions for other bodies on our planet. This is just a piece of my journey, where I'm at right now and what's brought me to this point. It's still unfolding, as I mentioned, and I would love to hear from you. What does this journey look like for you? Where are you at with this journey? What feelings came up for you as you listened to this episode? This is a work that we need to do together. It's not something that we're meant to do alone. Again, back to the system, the ecosystem of our reaching and growing into our highest self, of taking the foot off of the acorn, off of the necks of ourselves, of others. To be able to do that, we have to do it ourselves. And I would love to hear from you. Where are you at with this? How has this episode resonated for you? Please feel free to send me an email at valerie@valeriefriedlander.com or DM me on Instagram or Facebook and tell me about what this brought up for you, what your thoughts are. I would really love to hear from you. And I will talk to you all next time. Thanks for listening. I so appreciate you being here. If you got something out of today's episode, please share it. Leave me a review, take a screenshot, and post it on social with a shout out to me. Send it to a friend or, all of the above. Want to hang out more? Join me on Instagram. Or better yet, get on my mailing list to make sure you don't miss out on anything. And remember, your possibilities are as unlimited as you are. Allow yourself to shine, my friend. The world needs your light. See you next time.